grown as a musician. Beat the craft's what I had to do while you sitting. So you listen and think about how dudes spitting, but dudes written's a product.
Welcome to 3-Count Commentaries. Let's go through WWE's third quarter earnings call, which I finally took time to listen to and do a little bit of notes on. So these things are about 45 minutes or something like that. I'm only going to look at some of the more interesting bits, as I think most of this stuff is kind of poorly covered in the wrestling newsletter. They just kind of reprint stuff that you can see on the website. Like, you know, I don't need to see their budget and everything. We can look at their budget on their website. They put that stuff out there. We know what the earnings are. That's not even the most interesting part either. The how much money they made is not as interesting as how they make their money. You know, that's more interesting to me. So when I do these earnings call videos, I'm not just going to just repeat what other people are talking about. I'm here to look at the kinds of things that they're looking at. For instance, Nick Khan talked about the premium on live TV rights, which he talks about pretty much in every quarterly conference call. But this time he mentioned the Raw on Hulu, the re-airing rights, which I forgot even existed. So that means they get paid on Raw twice. They get paid from the original airing, which is USA Network, and they also get paid for the re-airing, which occurs on Hulu. So this is going to change a little bit, I believe. He talked about how a sizable audience actually watches Raw on Hulu, and that I figured that would be the case, but he doesn't gives it like any exact numbers. He just calls it a sizable and substantial audience. But he said in 2018, when the deal was originally signed, NBCU had a larger stake in Hulu than they do now. Now it looks like Disney is going to buy up NBCU's stake in Hulu, and they will also be acquiring Fox's stake in Hulu. So you're looking at pretty much Disney is going to buy out Hulu. And so they're going to have to shop that around. They may have to shop around the re-airing rights to Monday Night Raw. So that's a very interesting thing too. He also talked about expanding their original programming, and says that these things help them expand the brand. This is where he talked about Miz and Mrs. being picked up for another season. The Escape the Undertaker Netflix movie, which is awful, by the way. It's awful. I looked at bits of it. I was like, "Ooh boy, this one's not good." And they have a children's animated scripted project that they've been talking about for the last couple of quarters. It hasn't come up yet, obviously. He also talks a lot about the new media rights as they come up, the new buyers who are looking for us to add subscribers to their newly formed or already existing streaming services. And he talks a lot about Apple and Amazon and what they're giving to smaller or other types of sports like soccer or football or whatever. He always does this. This is kind of a Nick Khan thing where he kind of gauges the possibilities by looking at other sports. And he starts talking about how live products still dominate linear television. Again, linear television, for people who don't know, linear is your television. You know, that's linear. When they say linear, they're talking about you sitting in front of a TV screen. Digital or video, it would be tablets, laptops, stuff like that. So, and he talked about scripted programming is now migrating over to streaming services, and that Netflix will rather buy something than rent sports, which means that Netflix will not likely be in the running to, let's say, get the Raw rights. They will more likely want to buy the WWE. At least that's what they feel. And that, you know, they didn't say Netflix is going to buy WWE, so don't say I said that. The purpose is that Netflix is not looking to spend a lot on licensing and different things like that when it comes to live sports. That's what I mean. But they will be having the Vince McMahon documentary with Bill Simmons will also be on Netflix. And he talked about how it's similar to the Andre the Giant documentary that they did. I believe, was it on HBO? I think they did the Giant, Andre the Giant documentary. But this is a multi-part documentary going, I guess, span the entire career of Vince McMahon. So that ought to be very interesting. I hate Netflix with the heat of 1,000 suns. I absolutely hate Netflix. I will have to bootleg this. He talked about their new deal with Spotify, which a lot of people kind of overlooked. Spotify is now the exclusive podcasting partner of WWE. There's 165 million subscribers to Spotify, and that they're going to utilize their intellectual property and all of their talents to bring content to Spotify listeners. I really wish we could get like an estimate of what success looks like in terms of a podcast for WWE. Like, not a podcast in general, but a podcast for WWE. Like, if you have, let's say, Corey Graves has his own podcast or whatever. Obviously, 2 to 3 million listeners is really good. But, like, what's the minimum? Like, if he has, like, I don't know, 200,000, he's going to get canceled, kicked off or whatever. Is he going to be replaced? Like, how are they going to do this? Like, I know that there's going to be different kinds of podcasts that they're going to probably do. Like, I know that the New Day have their own podcast. They do general pop culture. They also do a lot of other stuff on their podcast. So that's one type of thing. But, you know, how many other people really have that kind of versatility in WWE that they could carry a podcast? I remember they had an Alexa Bliss podcast for a little while. That didn't seem to last. They had R-Truth had an interview show. Drew McIntyre also had an interview show. Both of those didn't seem to last. So that's why I asked the question. I was like, it's cool that you got this big deal with Spotify, but how are you going to, like, who are you going to use to tap into that? You know, as far as your talent is concerned. Pat McAfee, he already has his own highly successful podcast. He doesn't really need to go through WWE. So who could it be? Who would it be? You know, would you have Bruce do something? Because his podcast, I'm guessing, is still successful. Is what happened? Not what happened to win, but something to wrestle with. Is that still a popular podcast? I don't know. But I'm pretty sure they don't want to do business with Conrad, though. I mean, who does? And but they also talked about Nick Khan talked about some of the adjustments they're going to be making when it comes to pay-per-views. And I found this to be very interesting as well, because he talked about the big 5 pay-per-views, and that now they're going to have 5 big pay-per-views and moving to what they call shifting from arenas to stadiums. That they're going to do 4 stadium shows in 2022. Of course, he talked about this before. The Royal Rumble, which would be on a Saturday. The 2-night WrestleMania, which is Saturday and Sunday, in Dallas. Money in the Bank in Las Vegas, and SummerSlam in Nashville will all be stadium shows. They also eliminated the December pay-per-view, so there will be no TLC. There will be no December pay-per-view at all, as far as I know. And instead, there will be 2 January pay-per-views, which would be the Day 1 event from Atlanta in New Year's Day. That will not be a stadium show. It will be an arena show. And that's going to be the big show. And the way that they break these things down, they talk about it in terms of expenditure allocations, which is what Karen did before she, I guess, quit. The next day after this conference call, a bunch of people got fired, and then Karen quit. And she talked about the big expenditures. I'm not going to go through her part because the budgeting is so boring. It's the worst part of these conference calls. But the way that they talk about it is they do event planning. You know, basic event planning is you have to know where you're going to hold the building. Then you have to look at all your odds and ends, your labor, how much time is it going to take, all that kind of stuff. And of course, they look at these big events as the massive big expenditures for the quarter. And those big expenditures have to, of course, generate money in order to generate money for the quarter. So they're basically saying that fourth quarter 2021 is going to be lower than 2019 and maybe even 2020 because there will be no fourth event, no fourth pay-per-view event in December of 2021. because they're moving that show to 2022. I think you can do both, can't you? Like you can have a Christmas show and then have a New Year's show the next week. I mean, I don't see why you wouldn't do that. It shouldn't be like, I know maybe you let the wrestlers have the holiday off, even though we know like historically Thanksgiving and Christmas were like big wrestling days. But the philosophy from the fans' perspectives, I believe, have changed. Now I'm not going to say what everybody has become, but people are now going to start saying things like, oh, you should be home with your family for Christmas. You should be home with your family for Thanksgiving. And it's kind of like that whole sympathy crap. Instead of saying, hey, these are traditionally big days for pro wrestling, Thanksgiving and Christmas, we should try to nail that. It's going to be trying to go around it or create new ones, which is what they're trying to do with the New Year's Day thing. They talked about, to this point, the New Year's Day event. He said that the Trae Young participation in Madison Square Garden will actually continue in this day one event. Considering they haven't mentioned it outside of its initial occurrence, and then here again in this conference call, I don't see how it's going to turn into a long form story. But I guess we'll have to see as it rolls out in the future. They talked about changing their trading card partners. They're now using Panini, to which they said is a financial step up in financials. They also are going to start working with Fox on NFTs, which he says it's going to be a new revenue stream. This trading cards is also, it's a quote unquote new revenue stream because they've always had trading cards, but I'm thinking they're making more money now on this subject than they did before. So then after Nick Khan, they go over to Stephanie. And Stephanie's part is always the most interesting to me because she seems always have the more interesting subjects. So because she talks a lot about the brand. What is the brand getting involved with? And what are the sponsorships and different things like that? People who are paying them to do stuff. She started with quote unquote bad news, such as The Miz losing on Dancing with the Stars. Then, of course, she confirmed the move from arena-based to stadium-based around key tentpole events. But I found this to be the most interesting thing. It's very jarring also. That John Cena, his effect on business. And I see a lot of Tony Khan talking about the effect CM Punk has had on business. And he is right to tout that. Tout it. But the John Cena effect on WWE's business is tremendous. They said that he almost immediately became the highest selling merchandise that they ever had was the John Cena stuff. And that the TV ratings for ages 2 to 17, this would be minors, went up by 20%. And the TV ratings for the 18 to 49 went up by 10%. And that John Cena various John Cena videos were breaking records on their Instagram account. And they quickly became, I think, one of the top sports on TikTok, I believe it's called. I'm looking at the page. I haven't gotten there yet. I'm skipping ahead a little bit. And then he said, of course, she says his return ended up breaking Cena's Instagram record. 4.5 million viewers on TikTok. That's more people that watch Raw and SmackDown combined. So think about that. Consider that. More people watched Brock Lesnar return on Instagram than watched Raw and SmackDown combined. And you can probably add NXT in there. You'll probably get just under 4.5 million. Because I think SmackDown is good for at least a 2.0. And a Raw is probably 1.5. That'll get you 3.5. And then NXT is 800,000. That'll get you to 4.2 something like that million of all of their products. Brock's return, but also that's a different medium. So the ad revenue is going to be different. Okay. So his effect on business. Of course, he was selling out everywhere, and the SummerSlam Roman versus Cena was the highest drawing SummerSlam of all time. That includes merchandising, ticket sales, etc., etc. This, of course, includes all of the Attitude Era SummerSlams. Like, I know people get real tight-assed about that. They can't possibly believe it that WWE's business is actually better now than it was in the red hot 90s, but they're running bigger buildings. They're selling more merchandise now than they used to. They have more sponsorships than they used to have. The business model is completely different, And I know a lot of people that kind of hurts them to their heart because they think like the Attitude Era was the greatest time in wrestling history. But it's like they wouldn't be saying stuff like this if they couldn't back it up, And there weren't that many dome shows during the Attitude Era. There was a couple, but there wasn't as many as there are now. And I think the philosophy on doing the big stadium shows has changed a bit. I think Jim Cornette talked about that. Shows that need stadiums and stadiums that need shows. And that, that's kind of philosophy that has flipped, where now there is no event. The Cena and Roman was a match that needed a stadium. You need to fill a stadium with that. But when you have like the Royal Rumble or something like that, you have to create something that can fill that stadium. So the demand is different. The challenge is different. So you have that perspective. Stephanie said that their sponsorships are up 18% year over year and 25% over 2019. So they have now an official water and official beer. Then she talked about DraftKings, Credit One, and that they're moving from transactional contracts, or transactional deals over contractual deals. What that means is they used to do one-offs, like Snickers are going to sponsor WrestleMania this year, whatever. That doesn't mean Snickers are going to sponsor WrestleMania or even the next pay-per-view. What they want to do is have multiple year sponsorships where companies are going to agree to give them money over a longer period of time instead of a one-off, but over a longer period of time. And she says that this has led to a 60% increase in their contractual deals, and that client spending is up 44% year over year, and that they have over 50% returning partnerships. So that means that their partner retention rate is over 50%. So that means that companies who partner with WWE, over half of them continue to partner with WWE, which is a good thing. She also talked about 4 key metrics of growth in the branding space, which is content integration. She once again touted the things that everybody hates, like the horrible Xavier Woods water segment at SummerSlam, I believe it was. The zombies, she touted that again. And then, of course, she also talked about the Night Panther, the Old Spice commercials. And that, that's how, the future is in bringing the brands into the ring. And since, wrestling is scripted, you can just write them into the show. Creating customized content like the Old Spice Night Panther. So the 4 key areas of growth that she mentioned was content integration, which is doing what she has mentioned. 2 is talent. 3 is digital/social media. And 4 is international deals. Now, I was listening to this on the Fightful account, Fightful YouTube channel, because they decided they're going to monetize the WWE third quarter media call. So they put it up and then put ads in it. It's like, that's so weird. Anyway, the comment section there was really offended at the concept that Stephanie McMahon would compare WWE superstars to Marvel movies or Marvel superheroes. In so much that this is what she said. Stephanie said that Marvel superheroes, each one is their own franchise, and that WWE superstars are the same way. And then she gives different examples, such as Xavier Woods in gaming, or The Miz in reality TV. And then some people was like, they're delusional. They're comparing themselves to Marvel. It's like, you don't get it. They're talking about intellectual property. They're talking about the ability to kayfabe stuff and make up backstories and make up different things. They can do whatever they want. Xavier Woods is not a real person. There's a guy underneath that, but Xavier Woods is not a real person. The Undertaker is not a real person. Therefore, they can kayfabe the Undertaker's history. That's what they're saying. Captain America is not a real person. All of the Captain America's adventures are fictional. Therefore, what she's saying is we can create fictional universes featuring WWE superstars, which they can. I know it's a little bit more difficult when a guy's character is himself, like John Cena or Bret Hart. That's a little bit more difficult. You have to try to figure out how that works. But somebody who is a whole WWE creation like Kane, his entire life story is kayfabe because he's not real. He doesn't exist. So you can create comic books and video games and movies based on the Kane character, just like you can from Captain America. That's what she's trying to say. But a lot of these people have so low IQs, and I heard the wrestling fans supposed to have the largest IQ in all of sports. Turned out to be false. It's a lie. In any event, people who got really upset about that didn't understand it. I understood it. I just think it is far more difficult than she's letting it on to be, because you have somebody like John Cena, who his name is John Cena. His character's name is John Cena. His character has the same father that he has. His character comes from the same place he came from. So it's going to be a very difficult thing to kayfabe. Now, you could probably kayfabe his training. You could probably kayfabe some other stuff. But John Cena is John Cena. Right? Bret Hart is Bret Hart. You can't kayfabe that too much. But there are some outlandish characters that you can kayfabe a lot. So she talked about Raw and SmackDown's ratings slightly increasing despite the competition from live sports. That now they have 410 million hours of digital media being consumed and 12.8 billion views. 22 and 29% of their views upwards, increased rather, for Snapchat and TikTok, and they're the number one sports brand on TikTok. They're going to be a launch partner for Arcadia on Snapchat. And the game 2K22 will be out in March. They're going to have a difficult time with all the releases. I'm telling you, they're going to be pulling their hair out. Karen, of course, talked a lot about the revenues and different stuff like that. They made $255.8 million, which was up 15% from last year. So she talks about their Mattel deal, which makes up a great chunk of their licensing revenue. And they refuse to call the Saudi events. They call them large-scale international events, which is absolute doublespeak. But they got $45 million for that. Also, I learned here something I didn't know before, that WrestleMania is in the second quarter, not the first. So, I always thought that WrestleMania was there to anchor the first quarter, but it's in the second quarter. So that's interesting. So let's get to the questions. So as usual, I'm going to skip questions that I don't think are relevant. But the second question, which was asked by the same guy who asked the first question, is, are these scripted television projects even profitable? Because he talked about how the profit on these ventures were negligible at best, and he didn't really see the point of them continuing to do them. Nick Khan responded that it's been a completely change in model from these things. That before they were, funding their own projects, now they're merely licensing their own projects. That there is no risk or investment by WWE. And it took me maybe a second or two, to figure out what he meant. And that is WWE Films or WWE Studios or whatever it was. They were making their own movies, and it was costing them a hell of a lot of money. And so this was the guy are talking about. They're talking about, hey, are you writing, scripting, directing your own movies? And Nick Khan is like, no, people are pitching these ideas to us, like the Escape the Undertaker on Netflix, and we just license it out. So we're being paid for our intellectual property to do this thing, which I think is very interesting. Somebody asked, I think it was the fifth question, about the management restructuring and what are the goals of the management, and what can we expect. The oddball thing here is that Karen resigned the very next day, as a shareholder asked them about management restructuring. Karen resigned the next day. She had to know this was going to be her last day. So anyway, Nick Khan said they wanted to have the most efficient machine possible and getting the right people in place, and that it's working towards that goal, and he feels like that will continue and that they're almost there. So finally somebody asked about the on-screen product, and the sixth question was about NXT, about the feelings for the brand, the progress of the brand, and the goals of the brand. And Nick Khan said that it's starting how it should have been. Said they're going with younger, fresher approach. Recruiting efforts have spearheaded by Triple H and Bruce Pritchard. That they're finding young athletes who are not necessarily in the wrestling space and recruiting them, and they're looking to continue doing that. So Nick Khan remains steadfast in his desire to hire non-wrestlers to bring in football players and other kinds of athletes, which I know people don't want to hear, but at least he ain't changed his mind on it. I would rather him not flip-flop. I do find it very interesting that Bruce Pritchard is a part of this process. I know he was over creative. I don't see why he's also involved in talent relations. Triple H makes sense. I think he's on a higher level than talent relations now. Him and John Laurinaitis should probably be making those decisions. Bruce should just focus on writing the shows. But Bruce has always been a part of recruitment and talent and stuff like that. So maybe they just fudge and everybody does everything. It's not like they work in different places. Another NXT question I found very interesting was about the decision to move it to linear television. So somebody asked about whether NXT was better off on streaming or was it better for the linear television? And what about other projects that they're doing that this conversation may come up? And I immediately thought of the Undertaker documentary. And I was like, man, I'm pretty sure somebody could have paid big money for that. If they were going to do a multiple part Undertaker documentary, they probably could have got somebody, maybe A&E or a different kind of HBO or somebody like to bite on that project rather than putting it up on the streaming service. And basically Nick Khan just said that they have dialogues about it, and there's a constant dialogue about what's the best fit for the project. And I definitely think they should have hired out that Undertaker thing. They probably could have got a grip for that. It was him out of character for like the first time ever. I definitely think they should have farmed that one out. But that was probably like the most interesting final question. So these conference calls are very interesting. I like listening to them, even the boring parts. But a lot, of course, in WWE they always talk about their earnings, and the dirt sheets always record the earnings. A lot of times they skip over the expenses because they think that earnings are all that matters. They're like, oh, they're not losing any money. It's like their expenses are what they are, man. Like the expenses is going to go up. They're doing more stadium shows. So guess what? Expenditures are going up next year. I can tell you that right now. And it doesn't take much. You can fill a building and still lose money. So they better hope they got something planned for these stadium shows, or they're going to... The Royal Rumble is not going to flop, and I doubt WrestleMania flops. I think they're pushing it with the 2-night Mania. I don't think it'll probably be 2 nights for much longer. I think they just want to see if it works. I think probably the first... I really don't see them losing on the initial ideas. For instance, Money in the Bank in a stadium, good idea, maybe. I think people are really into the Money in the Bank concept. SummerSlam is just like WrestleMania, so that's a good idea. They didn't mention Survivor Series being in a stadium. So they didn't mention that. So I guess they're not. I got a feeling there probably won't be too many more Survivor Series events. I think we're probably, unless they change the format, I don't see there being too many more Survivor Series events, especially since the Survivor Series event is kind of an afterthought in modern WWE. I don't see there being too many more of them. But let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. Like this video, share this video, subscribe to the channel, donate to the channel. Thank you guys for your time, and I'll talk to you guys later.